It's my birthday! Or, well, tomorrow's my birthday. The Hashira training arc is already shaping up to be one of the best seasons of the series yet. But this episode may have already solidified it as the greatest season ever. This episode focused a lot on Giyu Tomioka's backstory and his mental health struggles and some of the best character writing I've ever seen in Demon Slayer. So let's jump in together and talk about a new episode of Hashira training. Or maybe you just need to level up some of your breathing techniques. Use code CTACTICS to get 10% off your order of gamer subs where you can become as fiery as Rengoku or as focused as Tomioka with this delicious drink that'll keep you on top of your game. I recommend the Jujutsu Kaisen flavor and as well one of their exclusive waifu cups. Pick some up and rep your favorite waifus and, tell them I sent ya. The episode picks up from last week with Lady Tamayo, who is visited by Kaguya's Kasugai Crow to be asked to join Shinobu in researching Nezuko's new ability to survive the sunlight. Now, as a Lady Tamayo enjoyer myself, I am beyond excited to finally see one of the best girls to finally return. Yushido, however, is furious because he immediately senses someone has come to Lady Tamayo's room, and so he barrels down the hall and stairs to Lady Tamayo's study. Seriously, this guy might as well be Sonic because at the first sign of anyone in Lady Tamayo's room, he was on that shit like chili dogs. Also, I am gonna say this because Attack on Titan has ended and Jujutsu Kaisen is in its off season, so I can literally say anything and pretty much nobody cares. Relevancy is like incognito mode as a content creator, and I'm about as irrelevant as ever. We need Lady Tamayo cross Shinobu Kocho fan art stat. I don't care who does it or how it's done, but we need this for humanity. This could solve world peace, people. We need this for future generations. Well, Lady Tamayo is quite shocked to hear that a demon like her is being summoned to the Demon Slayer headquarters. And I love the work of the talented men and women at UFO Table because her facials here were just so impeccable. Lady Tamayo says that now that Nezuko has conquered the sun, something has been set in motion. And I think she's talking about the final act of the show here. However, she's making an interesting self-correction and states that it may have been set in motion even before that. And we see an image of a swordsman standing across a woman and a man. Now, this man is clearly what is based on the Yoruichi Type 0 doll, Yoruichi Sugukuni. He's so far been a very important figure, yet hasn't really had a proper introduction yet. But right now in the story, there are a lot of parallels to that generation of Demon Slayers and this new generation of Demon Slayers. It shows that this new generation may be the final one of the Demon Slayers, because if they can figure out how demons can survive sunlight, which could lead to a reversal of demonization, and they defeat Muzan Jackson, then there may no longer be a use for Demon Slayers, because demons may no longer exist, or at least in the facet they do now. And this is doubly backed up when Lady Tamayo tells Yushido that this could very well be their final move. After the opening, Tanjiro gets a letter from Kaguya, which may be his final message, but even in his final moments, he tells Tanjiro to speak to Tomioka as he always puts himself in a negative frame of mind. After all, he said he wouldn't be joining Hashira training arc. Tanjiro is a perfect choice for this, as in many ways, he's carrying on the legacy of Rengoku in that he can still stir people to be their best selves. I like to compare him to Toru Honda from Fruits Basket. Both of them have this infectious positivity that changes people and makes them think in ways that help them move forward. For example, look at how Tanjiro was able to help Muichiro move forward in his own life. And I have no doubts that Tanjiro will be able to do that for Tomioka too. After all, he is best boy, and no one can defy the best boy. Tanjiro then exits his room to be greeted by none other than Aoi, who may also be best girl. I gotta admit, I kind of think everyone in Demon Slayer Corps is probably the best boy and best girl at this point. I just love them all. But he asks Aoi a question. If there is someone who is all alone, how would you go about telling that person you are not alone? It is quite a difficult question to answer. Even Aoi doesn't know how to answer it properly, and instead states that if it were her, she'd probably want to be left alone. And this is true. When you're isolating, typically the brain likes it when you isolate yourself further. This is exactly what I do in my own life, and I'm pretty bad with this habit, but it's a lot easier to be holed up and alone than it is to be extroverted. So typically I default to I'd just rather be alone. It is complicated though, Tanjiro even says as such, but everyone's brains, they work differently, especially in isolation, but typically it's all about finding the right way to approach it for said person that's isolating. I think Aoi, honestly, has the right approach. She defaults to not knowing, but instead shows genuine kindness by offering onigiri to both Tanjiro and the person he is talking about. It makes sense, right? If someone is isolating, they're likely not very kind to themselves, so if you just show kindness with no strings attached or expectations, like food, especially food, then that is a good approach to have. After all, food is a universal language, and I don't care where you live or who you are, tasty food, especially when given to you, and especially eating it with someone else, is always a good way to get through to people. Tanjiro makes his way to Tomioka's place of dwelling, and he makes his presence known with his innocent persistence as he tells Tomioka, who expected him to say he's leaving, is in reality entering. That's another small facet I loved. Sometimes you have to be forceful in getting your foot through the door. Nothing serious, but just a little pushing. After all, this kind of mindset has people pushing people away anyway, so if you just leave them alone, you're at worst enabling that mindset, or at the very least not doing enough to help. I love Tanjiro though. He pops in and immediately sits way too close to Tomioka, which he notices. I love how you can read his blank face and words and tell he's very off-put by Tanjiro. Like, bro, leave me alone! Tanjiro picks up on this and asks what's up with him, so he says he's angry that he didn't master water breathing to perfection because he was to become the water Hashira. However, he tells him that he talked to Urokudaki and that it isn't uncommon for people to develop new styles and techniques. I also like the tidbit of lore here where he says that he was told that water breathing is very in line with the fundamentals. So it's common for people that they will use that as a base to develop new techniques later on. He tells Tanjiro that he's no longer the water Hashira, and that is why he's angry with Tanjiro. He was supposed to fill the void he left in the Hashira. He then tells him to get out, but Tomioka underestimates Tanjiro and Kaguya's persistence. He goes to his room to leave the onigiri. Tomioka doesn't expect to go into his dojo to see that Tanjiro is there sleeping on the floor awaiting him. For days on end, Tanjiro annoys the ever-living shiz out of Tomioka to the point where he gives in and finally talks with the boy. Tomioka spills the beans that he never passed the final selection from way back. And the reason is, and I was so pleasantly surprised to see him here, was because of Sabito. When he was 13, the two quickly became friends and he loved him for his kind heart. So it was even harder when Sabito died that year in the selection because he was a spectacular swordsman in person. Sabito even saved Tomioka after he was injured by a demon. After that, he ran off to fight what we now know as the demon from the final selection that Tanjiro defeated. Though when he woke up, he was told that he had died in the selection. Because of this, Tomioka has this imposter syndrome where he has these intense feelings that he doesn't belong as a Hashira because after all, the only reason that he was selected is because Sabito died. As Tanjiro begins to tear up, he even tells him that he will never manifest a mark. But Sabito would if he were still alive. So he tells Tanjiro that he's a waste of time and to forget about him. And I can't help but feel sympathetic to Tomioka because even as a content creator, I deal with imposter syndrome every single day of my life. It's something I struggle with greatly, and a lot of what he thinks about himself is very much how I think about myself when I am feeling low. But here is the best part of the episode. Tanjiro says that he probably thinks Tomioka thinks he should have been the one to die. And after all, he knows better than anyone how that feels, and so he is the perfect person to talk to Tomioka. And the reason being is because of Rengoku. And I won't go over this in full detail. Instead, I'll literally recommend you watch this video I came out with last week, breaking down Rengoku's final speech to Tanjiro and Mugen Train. Nobody watched this video, but it literally details and breaks down everything in this scene, so please help a brother out, check out the video if you can. Tanjiro compares their two experiences and begins to empathize and cope with his and Tomioka's experiences, saying that it's not his place to criticize Tomioka when he knows nothing about him, but he asked to ask him a very simple yet eloquent and beautiful question. Are you going to pass on what Sabito entrusted to you? Immediately, the winds of change strike Tomioka, literally, and his eyes widen as he stands still. He's not walking away anymore. He's paralyzed because of what Tanjiro said. He remembers a time when Sabito struck him for saying that he should have been the one to die. Turns out that Tomioka's sister saved him over herself, and he feels guilty to the point he wishes he were the one to die. All of those feelings and that moment come rushing back to him, and he asks himself how he could forget that moment until now. And this is something that happens to a lot of people. Of course, it happens to me. It's the classic saying, don't forget what you were fighting for in the first place. Because as humans, we all get lost in the daily rigmarole of life, and over time, we forget why we were doing this to begin with. These days, I think a lot of younger people get caught up in money, women, and anger, and these three things have historically destroyed beyond countless men at this point. And for Tomioka, he was lost in his guilt for surviving. So he never stopped to think about that moment again because his mind was racing with a loop of self-deprecation and sorrow. He forced himself to forget because facing the reality that Sabito was dead and he was still alive, just like what happened to his sister, was too much for him to bear. It was all a coping mechanism to get him through the deep sorrow and guilt that he felt. So he chose to blame himself. He even calls himself immature, which is true, and it's a good thing that he noticed that. After all, this was a coping mechanism created as a child. These things do tend to stunt growth of a person, as it's like this high wall, and once you get over it, if you do, now there is a bigger and thicker one, just like what Tanjiro said in Mugen Train after Rengoku's passing. Tanjiro hearing this, his mind begins to race with the whys and why he said such a thing. Worried he had made his depression worse, Tanjiro begins to think of a scenario where they enter a speed eating contest. I just love this boy. Tanjiro is so careful around people and full of so much love that even when he thinks he has hurt someone, he tries to help by making it better at the very first step. But what Tanjiro said helps Tomioka, and he says he will now join the Demon Slayer Season 4 Hashira training arc. But not after they do that speed eating contest, of course. Afterward, Tomioka asks about Shinobu and what she is teaching him. Well, as for Shinobu, she is trying to calm herself down, and this is when Kanao comes by to tell her she is now leaving to train under the Wind Hashira. Well, just as one joins the Demon Slayer Season 4 Hashira training arc, another leaves as Shinobu won't be participating. Well, this scene is actually full of surprises too, because Kanao blushes, telling Shinobu she wants to continue training with her. She's so adorable. Which surprises her as Kanao is now voicing her feelings much more freely and honestly. So because of that, Shinobu tells Kanao it's time that she tell her about the story of Kane, her sister's death, and as well, how to kill the demon that killed Kane. Y'all, this episode was just so freaking good. I loved how it addressed some mental health issues Tomioka had, and I think that's why I loved it so much, because it was super difficult for me to go through these things in my own life, and to see an anime address them in such a well-done way, calmly and respectfully, and with understanding and care, is just such an amazing feeling. You have no idea. So remember, check out that Rengoku video. It'll enlighten you on the Tomioka scene and strengthen your love for Demon Slayer. Also, check out the other usual stuff like my merch store, which has exclusive art from Adoraburb, Echidnu, and my own stuff. So thank you all so much for your love and support. Bye-bye.